welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today we're tackling the spiritual economy of giving.
Right.
Now that might sound a bit heavy, maybe conjuring up dusty old books, but think again.
Yeah, definitely.
I've got some really fascinating ideas here from our source material that, really dig into what giving's truly about.
Way beyond just dropping something in a collection plate.
Exactly. We're aiming for those sort of aha moments today.
That's the plan. We're going straight to the fundamental principles, how they appear in your sources, especially within this, spiritual understanding.
Okay.
It's not just the act itself, right? It's the deeper meaning, the why behind it that we want to explore.
Trying to bring some clarity.
Hopefully, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a topic that gets discussed a lot, often with some confusion.
Okay, so let's maybe start with where things might have gone a little off track.
G'day.
Our source material points to the Word of Faith movement as one example.
Right.
Apparently there was this really strong emphasis on getting material wealth back.
Yeah, linking generosity directly to getting rich, based on certain interpretations of Scripture.
Which sounds appealing on the surface, I guess.
Oh, absolutely. This idea of a direct transaction, almost like, give X and get Y back in abundance.
But it didn't always work out like that.
No. The source points out it often led to disappointment for many people when those riches didn't materialize. And it also notes, maybe unfortunately, that it did lead to significant financial gain for some leaders within that movement.
Right, that contrast.
Yeah, that allure of predictable path to prosperity, even spiritually, it can be really powerful.
Totally. And it seems the reaction against that was pretty big.
It was. Some people started questioning, even long-held biblical ideas about giving altogether.
Like throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Kind of, yeah. And the source cautions against that, suggesting it could actually end up weakening the church's ability to do its essential work. Financially, I mean.
Okay, so that brings up a bigger point then. This idea of giving, it's not just in one place, is it?
Not at all. It's actually pretty widespread. Your sources show giving as a core requirement, or at least expectation, in various belief systems.
Can you give some examples?
Sure. Think about Islam. You have zakat, that's the obligatory giving with specific rules.
Right.
And then sadaqah, which is more voluntary charity.
Okay.
Both are seen as purifying wealth, supporting those in need. Really vital stuff.
And you mentioned Freemasonry, too.
Yeah. The source mentions required giving there as well, a duty.
Interesting.
It really underscores this fundamental human thing, doesn't it? Sharing, contributing to something bigger.
Yeah, it does.
And of course, Christian ideas about giving have really deep roots in Judaism.
So it's not isolated.
No, it's a thread running through different traditions, each with its own flavor, but the core idea is there.
Okay, so if it's so universal, what are the core principles according to our source? What's foundational?
Well, the first thing that really jumps out is this idea that giving is actually a privilege.
A privilege, not an obligation.
Yeah, that's the framing. The source uses a 1 in Chronicles. Everything comes from you, and we have given you only what comes from your hand.
That flips the script a bit.
It totally does. It reframes ownership, suggesting we're more like stewards, temporary caretakers.
So it changes how you view your resources.
Fundamentally, yeah. It's less about us producing something to offer God and more about recognizing that what we have is already a gift we're giving back from.
Wow, okay. That's a big shift. And then the purpose.
Right. The source is quite clear. The primary purpose is honoring God and strengthening his kingdom.
Specifically mentioning evangelism, the work of spreading the message.
Exactly. And it makes a strong claim that any other motivation ultimately is considered selfish.
That's quite direct.
It is. It emphasizes giving as part of, quote, kingdom culture, points out how much Jesus talked about it, using financial ideas quite a lot in his teaching.
So, the kingdom has its own economy?
In a sense, yes. A distinct way of operating, driven by different values than just profit or loss.
More like flow.
Yeah, think of it like an ecosystem. Generosity fuels growth, meets needs, all driven by love and shared purpose, not just balance sheets.
Makes sense. If you're building something, resources need to move towards the goal.
Precisely. And the source warns that if teaching about giving loses that kingdom focus,
it can get twisted.
Yeah, twisted into just pursuing personal gain, which circles back to those earlier misconceptions.
Got it. And giving shows something about the person, too.
Definitely. The source presents it as a tangible sign, an indicator of a changed heart.
Like the examples in Acts.
Exactly. The early believers sharing voluntarily. It suggests our approach to giving reflects our inner state.
Okay, now let's dive into something that always sparks discussion. Tithing.
Ah, yes, the T word.
There's definitely debate, and our source acknowledges the arguments against it, right?
It does, and
Yeah.
it notes the potential impacts, on church resources and maybe even on believers' own prosperity if they stop.
But it offers some context.
Yeah, really helpful historical context. It clarifies that originally tithing and giving weren't really about money, like cash.
More about substance.
Exactly. The first and best of the harvest, or livestock. It quotes Proverbs, linking honoring God with your possessions to the promise of abundance.
Which makes more sense in, like, an agricultural society.
Right, where wealth was measured differently, not just currency.
And interestingly, the source says tithing started before the law of Moses.
Yeah, way back with Abraham and Melchizedek.
Okay, tell us about that.
Abraham gives a tenth, a tithe, to Melchizedek. The source presents this not as like a legal must-do, but an act of honor.
Honor, gratitude.
In faith, yeah. A personal response to someone he saw as spiritually significant.
But then later it did become part of the law.
It did, yeah. Leviticus lays out the rules.
And there were consequences for not following them.
The source points to Malachi, yeah. This idea of withholding from God being under a curse.
Yeah.
But also the promise of blessing for bringing the full tithe.
To the storehouse, right?
To the storehouse, yeah. But it's crucial, as the source points out, to see this in context.
What's the context?
In Malachi, the issue wasn't just about money. It was a symptom
Of what?
of the people's hearts turning away from God. Their resistance to giving was like an outward sign of a deeper spiritual problem.
Ah, okay. Which leads naturally to giving under grace, then.
Exactly.
Ah.
Jesus brings in this new era, the dispensation of grace.
Where love is the motivator.
Love, not just codified laws.
So how did that play out?
Well, look at the early believers in Acts again. Driven by love for God, they gave willingly, generously, often way more than the Old Testament law required.
Because they wanted to.
Precisely. The principle becomes genuine love for God naturally overflows into giving. It comes from relationship, not just obligation.
Okay, so where does tithing fit in this new covenant then? Does it just disappear?
Not exactly. The source looks closely at the book of Hebrews.
Revisiting Abraham and Melchizedek.
Yeah, and it makes this kind of profound point. It talks about Levi, the ancestor of the priests who received tithes under the law,
Okay.
and says that Levi, in a sense, paid tithes through Abraham to Melchizedek even before Levi was born.
Whoa, okay. That's a bit mind-bending.
It is. Think of it like spiritual lineage. Because Levi was descended from Abraham, he was seen as participating symbolically in Abraham's act of faith.
So it connects the old and new covenants through Abraham.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
And it highlights the spiritual significance. Even if tithes today are physically received by people or organizations, spiritually, the source suggests God receives them. It reinforces this idea of our identity and faith connected back to Abraham.
So why do we give then under grace? Is it still about tithing?
It's less about the strict law and more about identity and love.
Or identity?
As people of faith, spiritual descendants of Abraham, like Galatians says, those of faith are blessed with Abraham.
So giving becomes an expression of that identity.
And an expression of love for God. It stems from that relationship.
Okay, that makes more sense than just following an old rule.
Exactly. So the source then kind of summarizes these key biblical principles.
Let's hear them.
Okay, first, giving is based on relationship, not just resources.
Like Jesus prioritizing justice, mercy, faithfulness over counting spice seeds for tithing.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Second, it's based on revelation, personal conviction, not wanting recognition.
The widow's offering story.
The perfect example. Her tiny coins meant more than the rich person's large sums because of her heart.
Okay, what else?
Third, it's based on resolve, a conscious decision, not just reacting emotionally.
Paul talks about that, right? Giving willingly, cheerfully.
Yep, in 2 Corinthians. Fourth, it's relational, not religious, meaning it's connected to the blessings we've received, giving in proportion.
Not just a flat rule for everyone.
Right. And fifth, it's reflective, not regulated. It reflects our overall faithfulness.
The idea of being faithful in little things leads to faithfulness in bigger things.
Exactly. Luke 16. If you're trustworthy with small responsibilities, you likely will be with larger ones too, including finances, giving.
So pulling it all together, the big picture is?
The big picture is that giving is like God's intended economic system for his kingdom's growth.
Not just about money moving around.
No, it's this powerful mix of loving God and loving others, shown in a tangible way.
And the starting point.
The very first act of giving, the source emphasizes, is giving ourselves completely to God.
Surrender.
Total surrender, which then makes everything else we have available to him too.
That's the real heart of it, isn't it?
That really seems to be the core message.
Yeah.
Moving beyond just rules to see giving as a privilege, something purposeful, deeply relational.
An expression of love and faith.
Exactly.
Okay. So as we wrap up, here's something for you, our listener, to think about.
A final thought.
Reflect on what it truly means to give yourself fully. That first act of surrender. How might that initial step reshape your whole understanding of giving time, money, resources, everything?
Yeah, think about the why. The motivations behind your own giving. How do they stack up against these deeper principles we've dug into today?
It's a question that hopefully keeps resonating long after this deep dive is over.